Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. Today, we are honored to host a leading voice in military science fiction, the author of over 60 books, and a veteran of the U.S. Army Infantry, Rick Partlow. So, Rick, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, we're here to talk about your novel, Contact Front, the first book in your Drop Trooper series. For listeners unfamiliar with it, can you give us the pitch for the book, focusing on the high stakes go to war or go to jail decision that your protagonist faces?
Sure. The elevator pitch is the main character is an orphan, an outcast, a criminal, small time con artist wandering the streets of a futuristic city in a civilization that he has little in common with and feels left out of when he is busted for felony murder, when a gang enforcer who's chasing him down gets killed by accident, which is in their society, just like ours. Somebody dies while you're in the commission of a crime. That's felony murder. So he has the choice of being sent to what they call the freezer, which is punitive hibernation, where they put you to sleep for 100 years or something. And the odds are, unless you're somebody important, they'll never remember to wake you up. Or he can join the Marines because there's a war on and we don't have enough people to fight it. So he is given that choice. And for some reason, which he doesn't understand at first, chooses to go to war.
Wow. So, that's your main character, Cam Alvarez, a
Yes.
cynical con man thrown into the chaos of the Marines. What is the single most important lesson that Cam Alvarez learns about honor, loyalty, or survival during this transition from con artist to Marine drop trooper?
Well, the lesson he has to learn, and one that goes against the last 12 or 13 years of his life, is to count on people, to connect with people, to have them depend on him and him depend on them, because he has been on his own for so long. And every time he's trusted anybody, he's been betrayed. So it's very hard for him to have people responsible for him or the other way around. As it turns out, he's a great in a battle suit. He's a great Marine at killing the enemy, but he really does not want to be a leader. And that's what he has to learn how to do to survive and to accomplish his mission.
So, as a veteran, you bring unique realism to your work. How much of your real world infantry experience did you purposefully inject into the fictional world of the drop troopers?
There's a lot of not just my own personal experience, but the experience of my relatives and friends. My father was in World War II. I have a lot of friends who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I did not. I was in the early '90s, so I didn't go over to Kuwait for Desert Storm. My unit was not sent over there. So I never had any combat experience, but I did have a lot of friends who were slightly younger than me that wound up in Iraq and Afghanistan, among other places. My son has been to Syria. He's with the Army National Guard. So I drew on a lot of different people's experiences to try to make this a realistic feeling military.
So let's discuss the technology. How do you balance the advanced concepts like the battle suits with the visceral ground level reality of infantry combat and contact front?
That took a little bit of adjustment because although I'm looking for realism, I wanted to move in a different direction from a lot of military science fiction that I'd read, where people basically take battles from historic wars like Vietnam or World War II or whatever, and just give them lasers instead of cannons and you know space fighters instead of fighter planes, and then just fight that battle over again. I wanted to have battles that were realistic according to the technology that would be available. So having new tactics and strategies for something like a drop trooper took a lot of thought and world building to figure out how you would use machines like that. Would they be more like a tank battalion? Would they be more like helicopters? It was so I, you had to figure that in a future with that much technology that anything big would be a big moving target. So the key to it would be mobility. And if you have mobility like that, that kind of erases the whole concept of being in front of or behind the lines because there are no lines. So
So
that
the
w-
core of the book often feels like found family. Why was exploring themes of loyalty, unit cohesion, and resilience so important to the narrative of soldiers who are fighting for a second chance?
well, it was. I didn't start with making that important for soldiers as much as it was for the main character. But it's been my experience that the military can be a second family, especially for someone whose home life is not that great. That's another part of my own military experience that was overlaid on this, was meeting people who had really crappy home lives. Their parents weren't there, didn't take care of them. They got into trouble with the law. They didn't do well at school. They got into the military and they found acceptance. They found someone who would be their brother, no questions asked, because they wore the uniform. And that I think is a universal experience in the military. Maybe not for everybody, but across the ages, is there's been lots and lots of people who don't have a great family and they find a new family in the military.
So, the title itself, Drop Trooper, suggests an elite airborne force. Can you talk about the inspiration behind the specific military concept of the drop trooper and how it shapes the types of missions that your characters undertake?
Well, I wish I could say I invented it, but Robert Heinlein pretty much did that in, I think it was the late 1940s with Starship Troopers, and everybody else has just been massaging the idea since then. But I did, like I said, I did put a lot of thought into the types of operations you would use mobile armor for, particularly the kind that I have, which is not quite the same as what Heinlein had or what other writers have written about. It's more to take a force that can support itself for short periods of time and drop it behind enemy lines and have it basically destroy the opposition to open things up for other ships to land.
So, the stakes are the survival of humanity. What makes the alien antagonist in Contact Front such an effective, terrifying, and relentless adversary for mankind?
The Tani, what makes I patterned the Tani after a combination of dynastic Egypt and imperial Japan in World War II. And what makes them so relentless is the fact that they really honestly believe, as much as any, religious fundamentalist on earth, that the galaxy belongs to them, that it was created for them by the gods, and that every single habitable planet is their birthright. And we as humans, when we started colonizing some of them, are trespassing on what's theirs, whether or not they were there in person or not. This galaxy is theirs, and we're not just merely trespassing, we are profaning sacred ground. So they hate us with the ultimate in religious fanatical hatred.
So, back to another technical question. What was the most challenging single action sequence or battle for you to plot and describe in the novel while maintaining tactical realism?
Well, if you want to be realistic, the hardest part is always having that action sequence where a bunch of plucky underdogs, does something against a much bigger force and survives. So the hardest action sequence was when in the book when Cam and the resistance force on the planet. I don't want to reveal anything more than that. I don't want to spoil things for anybody, but when they have to go up against the Tani alone with just Cam and a few trucks and crew serve weapons, and that's it.
So, you are known for being incredibly prolific, maintaining a remarkable output. This next segment is for you to elaborate on the craft a little bit. Could you walk us through the life cycle of a successful military science fiction series, from the initial world building idea to the discipline needed to finish dozens of books? And is there any secret to maintaining your output and originality?
Well, for me, I always come up with, I don't know if you call it an idea or a premise, but it's do I want to write a book about a war? If you want to write a book about a war, what part of a war do you want to describe? Do you want to talk about pilots or Marines or commandos or whatever? What's the basic premise you want to go with to tell your story? And that's not the same thing as what your story is, but it's like a vehicle to carry your story. Once you come up with that, then you have to come up with the right setting to showcase that. Like if you're talking in this case, say about Cam Alvarez being a Marine, you have to come up with a war where Marines in battle suits make a big difference. So what kind of a technology would support that? What kind of star travel? What kind of a government? So you have to build your world around the premise that you want to explore. And once you do the world building, and that may take a while. For me, I was very lucky in that I had built this world when I was much younger as a teenager for other books that I'd started. So I had all this information kind of in the back of my head and in several Word files. So I just massaged part of it to make the setting for it. And then once I got to that, I came over to the characters. I'm like, what kind of a character do I want to describe will be different from all the other books about Marines in battle suits? Because there are a lot of them, from Starship Troopers to Warhammer 40K. I mean, a lot of people have written about that. So I had to decide what makes this guy different. Uh, that's how I came up with Cam's backstory. I had the character really, the character arc he had to go through, at least in the first 4 books, kind of wrote itself because he's a loner. He's afraid of people. He's afraid of being outside of the city. He's even afraid of just being outside. And he's agoraphobic in the beginning of the series. So being inside that armor is a shelter for him. It's like being back in his mother's arms, which is losing her was what sent him down this road to begin with when he became an orphan. So once I had that, I plotted the story out. I'm a very intricate outliner. Some people like to write things off the seat of their pants, like Stephen King just sits down and writes. I need an outline, so I wrote like for a 80 or 90,000 word book, I would need about a 8 to 10,000 word outline. And I would take that and split it up into chapters. And that makes the actual sitting down and writing part easy because you're never sitting there thinking, what's going to happen next? What's the best thing to do now? Because you've gone through all that before. And I think that's the secret to maintaining output and originality is to kind of compact all of the doubt and the sitting around and staring at the screen into the first part of writing the book when you're writing the outline. Because I used to, when I first started writing, it was a long time ago, but I sat there in front of the screen for hours and wrote a couple hundred words and did that over and over for years until I got my first book done. Thinking about all that stuff beforehand makes it a lot easier, which is why I'm about to finish my 85th book.
Wow, that's some an accomplishment there. So, your books are often very gritty. How do you approach balancing the necessary darkness and the violence of war with the moments of humanity and hope that shine through your characters?
Well, a key thing that I did get from my military service and I get from everybody else I've talked to is how humor, particularly dark humor, is a big thing in combat. I mean, it's a big thing in the military all the time, but particularly in combat. You maintain a sense of humor no matter what's happening around you. No matter if somebody's shooting at you, if you're being bombed, you still maintain a sense of humor. You do and say outrageous things to maintain your humanity. And I like to make that part of the book, but I also, this is something I got from both people I talked to, and I've done a lot of research and reading about the experiences of veterans of the Iraq War and Afghanistan War and how they dealt with violence, not necessarily the violence they were committing, but the violence being committed against them, because that's really what I found to be the thing that really gets to people. It's not so much, I mean, you watch movies and you see these characters with PTSD having flashbacks to when they shot another soldier and still haunting. Well, what really haunts people, not all of them, I'm sure there are people like that, but what really haunts people the most is seeing their friends shot, seeing their friends get killed, seeing and having themselves get wounded. Those are what really sticks with you. You being under bombardment, mortars coming in and hitting your base, or you being the victim of an IED. Those are the things that really get to you. And I wanted to make sure that in these books that I dealt with loss and fear and how Marines and soldiers and sailors and pilots have to deal with that and have to be able to process it in order to move on to the next battle, because it's all going to happen again. And nowadays, maybe it won't happen as often, but in these books, these people don't get to go home between battles. It's light years and light years from home. So they're forced to deal with the ramifications of loss and fear and pain in between, sitting on that ship knowing they're going to another battle.
Contact Front is just the beginning. Can you give us a hint of where Deep Trooper series goes after the events of this novel, and how does the overarching conflict evolve across the rest of the books?
The first 4 books are the story of Cam Alvarez in the war against the Tani, and maybe I'm spoiling things to say he does survive it since it's a 16-book series. But it's a first-person narrative, so you pretty much think he's got to survive it. Once the war is over, Um, Honestly, I had never planned to take this past 4 books, but when I hit book 4, the rest of the books were doing so well that my publisher said, "Can you write anything else with these characters? Can you keep this going?" And I'm kinda like, "Well, the war's over." So in book 5, I started dealing with post-war, with the PTSD, with attempts to make a life afterwards, and then, of course, since this is a science fiction, military action thriller type series, he stumbles into something that gets him back into trouble, and he winds up working with the military again. First against, I guess what you would call criminals, cartels, but then later on against something much bigger. And I don't want to give too much away, but the odds, the scope, and the stakes increase with each story arc all the way through the end of book 16.
So, finally, what other projects or new series are you currently immersed in that your fans can look forward to next?
Well, what I'm working on right now is book 5 in a series called Archangel. And it is another military science fiction series based on the Archangels, which are a group of special operations troops that are cybernetically and biologically augmented, turned into super soldiers. And after the war, Brent Parthett believes that he was the only survivor of all the Archangels. And he finds out to his chagrin that he was not and has to deal with that. Without giving too much away, he finds out that the war that they were fighting might have been based on a lie and he's been betrayed.
So, if you could trade places with any one character from any of your novels for just 24 hours, which character would you choose and why?
That's a tough one. I would not trade places with Cam because in any of the books that I'm writing with him, he is pretty much in a really tricky situation. There's a book series that I wrote with J.N. Chaney called Taken to the Stars. And the main character in that is Charlie Travers, who was abducted as a college student in 1987, put in suspended animation. He wakes up, it's 2023, because I wrote it like 2 years ago, and he's with a bunch of aliens traveling around the stars fighting against an empire. That would be one that would be fun to do because they have all sorts of Star Wars type situations that are a lot less gritty and grim than the Drop Trooper series. But if I'm sticking with Athon books, Andy Clanton, who is the main character in my Earth at War series, if I could be him for 24 hours after book 6, that would probably be cool because he winds up after book 6 in a pretty good place, in a pretty good society, with the ability to just like hop around between the stars. And that sounds like fun.
Well, Rick Partlow, thank you so much for your time. The book is Contact Front. Where can our listeners find your work and follow your writing journey online?
But you can find me on my Facebook page at the Science Fiction Worlds of Rick Partlow, which is facebook.com/duty honor planet. And I will answer any questions that people post for me there. You can message me there and I will answer. If you want to contact me via email, it's dutyhonorplanet487@gmail.com. I also have a Instagram page, Rick Partlow 1966, but that is a combination of my science fiction work and also my nature photography, which is my hobby.
Well, that is awesome. I will have links to your book from Amazon in the show notes, and I will go find your Instagram to link that for listeners as well. And again, thank you for joining me today. To all our listeners, this is Rick Partlow, author of Contact Front. Thank you for tuning in, and join me next time on on the Mind of Sai Marie. Excuse me. Until then, remember that the mind is the most compelling story that you will ever tell.